Hey everyone. Tonight we're in the heart of a city that's sizzling under a relentless sun. You feel the brown heat of the ground reflecting off your bare legs, and hear the excited hum of voices mixed with the hawking of vendors. You probably wouldn't survive this. And yes, that's the fun of it. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Post in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You walk along the worn stones of the Athens Agora and notice how each step echoes as a reminder of centuries of trade and conversation. Urban markets in 5th century Athens BC were vital centers of trade and politics, where citizens and foreigners mingled in search of goods and ideals. The air is thick with aromas, the sweet scent of honey dripping on slices of fresh cheese, an earthy undertone from fine herbs piled high in baskets, and the unmistakable smell of bread fresh from the clay oven. As you walk along, you notice a baker waving dough like a dancer at a festival. A curious fact: Mediterranean leavened bread often included crushed figs to aid the process, a trick that would go viral on Foodie TikTok today. Barley stalks, the staple of food life, are piled in rustic sacks next to urns of olive oil, and a clumsy potter nearly knocks over a massive vase, making you giggle nervously. The noise around you grows louder as a fishmonger holds up a huge rack of sardines and starts shouting out the price, drawing in kids running around with coins to play auction. You feel the slippery texture of fish scale that's been thrown at you to show how fresh it is, and almost let out a little scream. Thankfully, it passes as an ASMR sigh. Historians still debate whether these auctions were more effective in maintaining order or creating controlled chaos on the streets. In one corner, metal traders weigh their coins against small, labyrinthine bronze weights. Fun fact: many of these scales were engraved with mythical animals to ensure honesty in the transaction. You can hear the soft clink of coins hitting the tray and imagine the frustration of exchanging drachmas for sun-hardened ceramic obelisks. Historians still debate whether standardized currency came before precision scales, which you could imagine has caused some heated arguments. You try to ignore the scorching heat as you watch the women in light linen clothes stirring balusters of spices. Each grain of cumin seems to glisten in the sun, and suddenly you imagine yourself in a Spartan version of Master Chef. I know, first world complaining about the heat, but wait until you see the sandals they wore. A slave hurriedly carries a large jug of wine to an aristocrat, and you smell the sour, fruity scent bubbling through the air. Suddenly, a herald holds up an aged parchment, announcing decrees from the town council. His voice echoes through the market gates like a rhythmic drumbeat that captures your attention. You look at the ink-penned letters and wonder how many hands touched that scroll before it reached you. Fun fact: official parchments were often coated with a thin layer of steinum to protect the writing from mold. Historians still debate whether this technique originated in Egypt or Cyprus. From morning to afternoon, the square throbs with philosophical discussions. Some citizens stop to listen to a disciple of Socrates declaim theories about justice while they distract themselves from buying olive oil. You feel the weight of heavy ideas colliding with the heat of the gravel beneath your feet. The eloquent oratory, the discourse on notions about virtue and the soul, almost makes your brain fries quickly as toast exposed to the sun. And get this, there's an academic debate about the extent to which philosophers have influenced state policies. Meanwhile, a street performer juggles flaming torches, creating a play of light and shadow that contrasts sharply with the overwhelming heat. You almost get distracted and let out a laugh, surprising yourself with your own sense of humor amidst the chaos. Fun fact: these artists often use straw to cushion their falls, a practice that survives in circuses to this day. Historians still debate whether street performers were considered honorable professions or just marginal entertainment. You sink your fingers into a basket of fresh fruit, soft figs, caramelized dates, and nearly translucent grapes. Each bite is a contrast of textures and temperatures, a delight that masks the reality that you're probably a little lost without a map. Someone next to you tries to haggle over a thin woolen tunic, and you reflect that winter clothing might have saved your life today. Irony is the devil's bread and butter, and the sun here is its master. In the distance, The clock tower warms up as birds circle above the agora. Their songs mix with the cries of the cries and the clanging of sculptors hammering marble. You can even taste the fine limestone dust entering your nose, another sensory touch that leaves your shirt covered in white stains. It's a complete experience, worthy of a historical documentary, if only it weren't so chaotic and, let's face it, a little uncomfortable. You pass a jewelry workshop where goldsmiths cut amethysts and coral for high-class adornments. The brilliance of the stones dazzles you, but nothing a pair of squinted eyes can't fix. The artisan gives you a curious look, perhaps wondering why someone is taking invisible selfies without using a papyrus scroll. And then, under the relentless sun and the urban symphony of conversations, you ask yourself, is this the limit of the sacrifice for a crusty loaf of bread? How would you, a modern citizen, survive an entire day under the burning market? Probably not, but at least now you know what it would be like to try. And in the end, let it go. You step aside into the shade of an olive tree, take a deep breath, and enjoy the scenery as if savoring the last crumb of historic adventure. You emerge from beneath the shade of an olive tree and head toward the public baths, but the chills run down your spine, literally, as soon as you step onto the damp tiles. Remember the scorching sun at the market? Here, the cool water may provide relief from the heat, but the lack of privacy and hygiene poses far greater risks. The Greek baths, built from the 5th century BC onwards, were as important social gathering places as the agora, with hot, cold area, tepid area, and frigid area pools to suit every taste and every bacteria imaginable. You enter the tepidarium, where the pleasant temperature does little to prepare your body for what is to come. Historians still debate whether the aqueduct system that brought water to the baths was inspired by Persian or Egyptian engineering techniques, but one thing is certain. The rudimentary piping left room for fungi and parasites to thrive at every turn. These days, you might find it strange that someone would pay to swap stories to the sound of water dripping from a rusty pipe, but to the old-timers, it was as normal as your morning meme feed. As you sit on a marble bench, you notice small puddles of standing water around the drains. Fun fact, many visitors carried wooden scepters to scratch inaccessible areas of accumulated dirt, a sort of portable mop that also served as a support in case of unexpected slips. You try to keep a straight face, but imagine the scene of someone slipping and dropping the scepter on someone else's face. An epic arena fight worthy of a viral video. The room goes silent when a man with a thin beard lets out a sigh that echoes like rhythmic calls. You hold your breath and listen to the tension in the air. Rumors circulate that a typhus epidemic broke out last summer, which many attribute to diseases caused by poorly cleaned communal baths. Historians still disagree on whether the cleanliness measures were practically non-existent because of the belief that dirt protected against foreign diseases, or whether the lack of bacteriological knowledge was the real culprit behind the sanitary disaster. The water is cloudy and reflects your questioning face as you ponder how many dozens of bodies have passed through here without so much as a splash of running water to wash away the slime. You try to float away from the shore, but you soon realize that the space is as crowded as a weekend pottery sale. Every gulp of air you take is accompanied by a symphony of sneezes and coughs, almost like reverse ASMR. It makes you want to laugh, but the laughter could be misinterpreted as teasing someone with slime-laden eyelashes. You remember a philosopher who said that the body is the temple of the soul, but here the temple seems like a battlefield between bacteria and dignity. Light joke, if it was a temple, I'd rather have my soul dirty than catch a fever. While you dodge someone by rubbing yourself with a raw loofah sponge, notice a dispute over towels nearby. Some use expensive pieces of fabric, others wipe themselves with scraps of old clothing. Fun fact, the Zistos, a kind of exercise platform, was used to dry the body in the sun, but many preferred the smell of other people's sweat to waiting for daylight. You smell cedarwood oil mixed with a hint of mustiness, an exotic enough combination for a hipster chef. Historians still debate whether aromatic oils were applied for hygienic reasons or purely for the vanity of aristocrats. But you swear that even the most expensive scent can't completely mask the rustic odor of humans lined up in communal baths. Suddenly, you hear a sarcastic comment about a Greek mud bath, and you notice that some visitors are rubbing lumps of white clay into their bodies to soften them and ward off the evil eye. You imagine a modern spa class with clay masks, but without the lounge playlist. Here the only sounds are the creaking of marble and the harsh chatter of exhausted workers. Joke 2. If you think expensive spas are bad, try paying with drachmas and discover that your cedar oil is fake. As you step out of the cold pool, your feet barely hold on to the slippery floor. You nearly fall, but you grab onto an ornate bronze handrail, despite the risk of tetanus. By the way, the word tetanus didn't exist yet, but the bacterial infection that caused the spasms was known as terrible trismus, precisely because it locked the jaw. Historians still debate the extent to which Greek medical knowledge could combat these infections, since the concept of germs would only emerge millennia later. Finally, you wrap yourself in a rough towel and walk to a nearby fountain, where you can wash away the accumulated soap. Each drop that runs down your body is reminiscent of an inside joke about a 5th century detox. But there's no green juice here, just cold water and the echo of distant voices. You look up and see children squirting each other, as if in a makeshift water gun battle, a scene that is somewhat replicated in modern water parks. As you walk away, your skin still crawling, you reflect that perhaps it would be better to face the 40 degrees Celsius sun than to endure another communal bath. Final fun fact. During the plague of Athens, 430 to 426 BC, it is estimated that more than a third of the population succumbed. Some attribute the cause to the use of unhygienic public toilets, but acknowledge that the lack of sanitation and clean water was the deciding factor. Historians still debate whether the epidemic was typhoid or smallpox, an open debate that continues among experts. You head out on a main street, thinking about swapping your body wash for a good old-fashioned cool shower at home. You might even consider using a modern 3-in-1 shampoo instead of this oily, moldy concoction. And as your skin glides over your damp tunic, you realize, could you survive a day in ancient Greece? Maybe you could if you ignore the smell, or maybe you couldn't if you remember this communal bath. Either way, your hygiene tolerance will never be the same. You walk down the uneven cobblestone street, the remnants of the communal bath still clinging to your skin, and come to a tavern lit by flickering torches. The aroma wafting through the open door is both tantalizing and challenging. In ancient Greece, eating was both a social ritual and a test of endurance. Banquet halls served everything from roast lamb to the lugubrious portfolios of pork and beef entrails, a dish that, let's face it, would make any modern chef think twice about posting on Instagram. You sit on a rustic wooden stool, your spine creaking, and watch as the waiter arrives with a steaming bowl. The broth is dark, as if it has been passed through a charcoal filter, full of bits of tripe and fat that form an oily layer on the surface. Historians claim that the consumption of entrails was common to make use of all parts of the animal after sacrifice, an economic and even spiritual practice in certain agricultural ceremonies. The first spoonful brings a meeting of textures, the bubbling of the piping hot broth, the elasticity of the membranes, and an earthy flavor that recalls an unlikely marriage between wild mushrooms and burning coal. You try to maintain your composure, but a slight wrinkling of your nose betrays that your modern stomach may be in internal conflict. Light joke, if this broth were a film, it would be a psychological horror with hair-raising chills. As you savor, or mentally justify, each bite, you look around and notice that the wooden ceiling is adorned with animal skulls, a rustic decoration that serves as both a trophy and a subliminal message. Here, you can eat anything. Fun fact, in some regions, it was believed that eating beef liver gave warriors extra strength, so elite soldiers would consume these delicacies before difficult marches. You almost feel like a gourmet hoplite, ready for the next battle, or the next round of fermented fish dip. The next dish arrives without ceremony. A platter of olea, fish left in amphorae to ferment in brine for weeks. The smell hits you first, a punch in the face that combines the smell of old cheese, lactic acid, and concentrated sea air. You remember the burning market, but you swear you've never smelled anything so penetrating. Joke 2. If there were a caption on TikTok, it would be when a fish decides to reincarnate as Swiss cheese. Pulling the fish by its exposed bones, you take a cautious bite. The flesh melts in your mouth, a contrast between the harsh salt and the sweet sour taste that makes your brain quickly process. Is this fish or an alchemy experiment? Historians still debate whether this fermentation practice was inspired by the Egyptians, who famously preserved fish in Nile mud, or whether it arose independently on the islands of the Aegean Sea. As you chew, you notice the company of an Athenian prostitute, draped in colorful veils, who watches you with a half-smile. She whispers something, possibly an invitation, but you're too focused on not choking. In the background, a bard gently strums a lute, creating a sound that almost offsets the stench of the fish. Music, they say, helped mask strong odors during prolonged feasts, like an acoustic version of an air filter. You grab an extra piece of barley bread to clean your tongue, but soon realize that the dense crumb absorbs salt like a hungry sponge. Fun fact, the lighter, airier bread would only come from specialized ovens in Pergamum, and even then it was rare outside of the larger villages. So today's rustic bread is basically the artisan of antiquity, minus the hashtag and the food truck. The host approaches, pours wine from an amphora, and toasts your health. The taste of red wine, mixed with herbs like thyme and dill, offers a fruity, savory respite. You even feel a slight tingling sensation on the roof of your mouth, a welcome contrast to the sea of fat and salt you've just endured. Joke 3. In the modern world, jumping straight for the wine would be a sign of desperation. Back then, it was a sign of survival. As you sit, you overhear a conversation about a spring festival where young people compete to eat the most fresh figs. Historians still debate whether the Thesmophoria festival, dedicated to Demeter, actually included eating competitions or whether it's just a popular myth. You imagine a fig-tasting marathon to the beat of drums, a carbohydrate Olympics. The heat in the tavern makes the air shiver, and beads of sweat run down the back of your neck, reminiscent of the stagnant pools of water in a public bath. You dry your forehead with a linen towel that absorbs very little. You feel its rough texture and think that a fan would do wonders around here today. But of course, no selfies in the wind to record the relief. Suddenly, a servant arrives with a smaller dish. Pieces of sea urchin, carefully extracted from their shells. The consistency is creamy, almost gelatinous, and the salty taste mingles with the freshness of the sea. This delicacy was considered exotic and inaccessible, served only at court banquets. However, in some smaller ports, fishermen from Samos offered fresh sea urchin in small seaside taverns. A marginal curiosity, sea urchin was believed to have aphrodisiac properties, an idea that survived until the Renaissance in medieval texts. You close your eyes as you bite into it, and for a moment you feel like you're floating in the crystal-clear waters of the Aegean Sea, a sensory relief after the intensity of the previous dishes. But you're quickly drawn back to the table when someone whispers about a medical conference discussing whether eating olea could prevent certain nutritional deficiencies or, conversely, cause chronic amine toxicity. Academic debate. Modern researchers are still weighing the balance between the probiotic benefits of fermented foods and the risks of toxic byproducts. At the end, with your stomach doing carousel turns, you lean back on the worn stool and contemplate the outcome of the experience. You entered alive, a little disgusted and curious, but still alive. You pay the drachma so quickly that you almost drop your change, determined to get out of there before the next exotic dish arrives. Remember the fishmonger at the market? Well, he would seem like an amateur to you. As you leave the tavern, the evening breeze hits you like a refreshing shower, a welcome one, and you realize that your modern palate has been challenged to its limits. Final question. Could you last a day in ancient Greece with these delights or culinary nightmares? Maybe yes if you brought a packed lunch of brown rice, or maybe not if your modern stomach has limits, which is clear now because yours is crying out for help. You enter a shaded courtyard where restless minds gather beneath marble columns, and you soon realize that your brain is about to undergo a marathon of abstractions. Here, at the academy founded by Plato in 387 BC, disciples debate on the dirt floor, a historic event that marks the first institute of higher learning in the West. The air is filled with thoughtful voices and intense whispers, as if each word were a musical note in a symphony of ideas. You sit on a cold step, try to adjust your breathing to the arguments. Across from you, a young philosopher argues that justice is the harmony of the parts of the soul. Another retorts that justice might just be an arbitrary social contract. Light joke, You swear this sounds like something four influencers would argue about in the comments on YouTube. The sun filters through the olive leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that seem to form abstract concepts dancing on ground. As you listen attentively, you notice a curious fact. Some students were drawing reflections on the floor with pieces of chalk made from local limestone, a makeshift blackboard that evaporated at the first breath of wind. You can imagine carrying a portable projector in the 5th century BC. It almost makes you want to record a tutorial on how to make slides with stone chalk. Historians still debate whether Plato allowed women to actively participate in debates in his early days, or whether it was a privilege restricted to free male citizens. The debate gains momentum when someone invokes the famous allegory of the cave. "You see only shadows on the wall," says the speaker, pointing to a rectangle of light in the distance. His stomach makes a discreet noise, reminiscent of the stomachs growling in the market and the tavern. Joke 2. If this cave were a cinema, its popcorn would echo louder than the arguments. You find yourself smiling. After all, even if you're about to lose a brain cell or two, the feeling of being part of something great is almost addictive. Voices rise as another student claims that the sensible world is nothing more than an imperfect copy of the eternal forms. You tilt your head, wondering what form this form of just balance might have been to avoid losing in drachmae negotiations. Fun fact, ancient papyri found at Oxyrhynchus reveal that the earliest manuscripts of Plato's works were written on scrolls without illustrations, probably to avoid visual distractions, something modern lecturers might want to think about. Historians still debate whether these original copies were written by Plato himself or by anonymous assistants. Suddenly, a disciple pronounces the expression platonic love with a wry smile, reminding you that, in reality, Plato is discussing a type of affection for the soul, not the sexless relationships that pop culture usually attributes to it. You let out a soft chuckle, like an ASMR of, "I learned something cool today." The murmuring around you slows down, and someone passes you a pitcher of water. You wet your lips and feel the coolness that offsets the heat of the arguments. The debate delves into political issues. The ideal republic is governed by philosopher kings, for they alone know the form of the good. You shudder, remembering the chaotic assemblies and the trading floors of the market. Joke 3. Imagine a philosopher in a robe moderating a modern senate. We might never see a late-night tweet. The hushed cadence of the voices creates a sense of total immersion, almost meditative, as you try to balance the weight of each premise. In a corner, a young man picks up a scroll and reads excerpts from an unfinished dialogue in which Socrates asks whether virtue is teachable or innate. You hold your breath. This sounds as dramatic as a TV series finale. Fun fact, Plato is believed to have kept his sketches in ceramic jars to protect the parchment from moisture, a storage alternative that would make any modern archivist break out in a cold sweat. Historians still debate whether these dialogues accurately reflect Socrates' thought or are Plato's own literary creations. As the sun sinks below the horizon, the columns cast long shadows and the discussions fade to silence, like a subtle cut. You stand up, the marble cool against your fingers and a metallic taste in your mouth, a reminder that philosophy, while fascinating, can leave your mind spinning in an endless tangle. Before you leave, an older disciple approaches you and asks what you thought. You hesitate, wondering how to summarize hours of debate in seconds. Then you say, in a relaxed tone, "I thought it was intense, but if I had to choose my daily mantra, it would be less shadows, more light." The smile you receive is almost an honorary badge of understanding, at least until the next question comes along. As you walk out of the courtyard, you feel the echo of the concepts still reverberating in your head. The night breeze brings you a gentle relief, mixing the scent of jasmine with the dust of philosophical footprints. You realize that, despite having almost stopped thinking and having mentally crossed study philosophy off your list, there's something seductive about expanding the boundaries of your mind. And then you ask yourself, could you survive a whole day of endless debate about forms, virtue, and justice? Maybe you could if you kept a bottle of water nearby and learned to laugh at your own thoughts. Or maybe you couldn't if you realized that your modern sanity has a short shelf life compared to these ideas. Either way, you leave this courtyard feeling like you've lived the fragment of eternity. and that alone is worth the philosophical headaches. You wake before sunrise, wrap yourself in a simple woolen tunic, and head to the training grounds, your feet echoing on the cold stone blocks. Here in Sparta, the Agoge, the rigorous military education system begun by Lycurgus in the 7th century BC, forms boys and girls for a life of discipline and combat. Historical fact: Spartan boys left home at the age of 7 to live under state supervision and learn martial arts, endurance, and absolute obedience. The morning air is thick with dew and the shouts of instructors, each one louder than the last. You feel the sharp chill cutting through your scanty robes, and, for a moment, you are reminded of the sweltering heat of the Athens marketplace. Almost nostalgic. Just kidding. If you complain about the chaos of a modern CrossFit workout, wait until you hear your Spartan captor's comments about your lack of team spirit. The first exercise is endurance, running through the gnarled olive trees of the countryside. As you run, damp leaves splatter your ankles and roots lurk like snakes ready to strike. A side note: in Sparta, running competitions were sometimes held between young men completely naked to further test their resistance to cold and embarrassment. Something that, let's face it, your 21st century ego couldn't handle. You try to keep up the pace, but your calves are burning and you think that, at the very least, a pair of cushioned sneakers would make a difference. Once the race is over, you are ordered to fight against a partner of similar age. The weapons are simple: solid wooden clubs and light shields made of hides. You receive a light blow to the shoulder that makes your body shake, reminiscent of the impact of a wet towel, and not exactly comfortable. Historians still debate whether the Spartans actually fought with wooden clubs in training, or whether this is the result of dramatic accounts written by Athenian authors, perhaps biased by the rivalry between city-states. Your instructor mutters something about strength without discipline is like a shield without metal, and you realize that the Spartans valued obedience more than individual will. Each command echoes across the stone field like a war drum. Joke 2. If you think your boss at the office is strict, imagine a supervisor who can beat you for denting a shield. Next, you kneel on a mat of fine sand to practice throwing a spear. The cool, metallic tip brushes your palm, sending a shiver of excitement and fear through your skin. You adjust your grip and fire the iron at a wooden dummy a few feet away. The Spartan gargoyle, as they call it, amid nervous laughter. The spear hits its target with a dull thud, sending up a small whirlwind of sand. Fun fact: bronze discs were used in precision exercises before the spears, a practice that is said to have inspired the creation of later Olympic competitions. The training continues with the lifting of a heavy log, a task that tests your brute strength. You lift the log above your head while the instructor timed you and marked your performance in sand scraped into the ground. The log creaks and your back protests, but the sound of the imaginary ticking marks each second as if it were a race against death itself. A reminder that in Sparta, weakness was a crime against the state. You remember your current gym workouts: bench presses, squats, cardio. They all sound like recreation compared to this rite of passage. Joke 3. If your workout playlist has eye for the tiger, here they only have the sound of spears hitting shields, and the instructor's shouts will be the most intimidating soundtrack you've ever heard. Next, your instructor orders a quick dip in Eurotas River to purify your body and mind. You dive headfirst into the icy water that makes your skin tingle, reminiscent of the public baths in Athens. Only this time, without crowds of strangers sharing the same pool. The current carries you along for a few feet, and you hold on to a smooth rock, trying not to swallow any water. Fun fact: the water in Eurotas was considered especially invigorating by the Spartans, who even had a small shrine dedicated to the river god. But you wonder if that was just an excuse for a cold dip after the lot. Catching your breath, you pull your soaked tunic back on and listen to your teammates murmuring praise and taunts. The training ends with jumping exercises, jumping over low obstacles about 3 feet high, acted as if you were trespassing on enemy territory. Historians still debate whether these obstacles were originally designed for real training or whether they became part of romantic legends written centuries later. By the end of the morning Agoge, your muscles are tired, your clothes are soaked, and your mood is on the brink of exhaustion. You wipe your face with the back of your hand and feel the rough texture of your sodden hair. There's a collective silence before the instructor declares, "You're Spartans now." You search your fellow trainees' eyes for a breath of camaraderie, a spark of shared pride, and perhaps a mutual desire to return to the comfort of your modern mattress. As you walk back to your dorm, you pass young people practicing militia, hand-to-hand combat without weapons, and wonder if you'd ever use this skill to defend yourself from criticism on social media. You look up at the soft gray, overcast sky and think that at least there are no phone notifications here to remind you of urgent messages. Your icy skin contrasts with the memory of the hot Athens sun, and you wonder, could you survive this extreme regime for more than a day? Maybe if you brought a modern foam pillow and some lip balm. Or maybe not, if your body complains before the sun even finishes rising over the Spartan horizon. And then you decide, it was worth the experience, but tomorrow, when you order breakfast in your modern apartment, you will enjoy every drop of creamy milk and every slice of toasted bread without having to fight for them. You approach the Nix, the hill where the assembly, ecclesia, meets under the open sky, and immediately feel the vibration of voices rising like an off-key choir. Here, Athenian democracy reaches its peak, its most glorious chaos. Historical fact, between 500 and 322 BC, the ecclesia met about 40 times a year, allowing up to 6,000 free citizens to vote directly on laws, decrees of war, and financial policies. When you step onto the makeshift stage, you notice stone benches arranged in a semicircle, and in the center, the Boulion, where the president of the day presides over the discussions. The murmur turns into a roar as speakers take turns on the brattle, a wooden soundboard designed to amplify voices without a microphone. Fun fact, on special occasions, someone would blow an aurochs horn to get the attention of the citizens scattered along the hillside, a primitive reference system to the modern red alert. You find a space between dozens of men in robes and woolen scarves, try to keep up with the frenetic pace of the speeches. Some shout nicknames for rival politicians. Imagine a parliamentary debate, but with improvised insults and no commercial breaks. Light joke, if you think Twitter is toxic today, try processing verbal abuse face-to-face, live, in a windowless auditorium. There's already a heated debate over the proposal to allocate part of the treasure from the Temple of Athena to repairs to the city walls. Some argue that without reinforced walls, the city is vulnerable to Persian invasions. Others counter that sacrilege has never been good for the morale of the citizens. Historians still debate whether the fortifications of the Themistocles walls were completed before or after the Salamis War, which could change the weight of this decision in recent years. You raise your hand when the president asks who supports reinforcing the walls and throw your white pebble into the clay urn. The delicate sound of the stones hitting each other reminds you of summer rain, an unexpected ASMR effect in the midst of the hustle and bustle. The proximity of the votes gives you butterflies in your stomach. Every marble granule counts, and your drachma invested here could decide the future of the polis. During the break, a citizen approaches and whispers that he has already seen a planned ostracism in 6 months' time, a separate vote to banish any individual who threatens the stability of the regime. Marginal curiosity. To ostracize someone, at least 6,000 clay ballots with the target's name on them were needed, and they were deposited in a deep well, symbolizing permanent exile. You wonder, how many tweets would it take to ban someone today? As you watch colorful banners flutter in the wind, the debate comes alive. A speaker holds up a scroll with no punctuation and reads a speech so long that the words blur together like old music. Joke 2. If there were subtitles, you need 2 translators and a video editor just to keep the audience awake. You realize that participation is limited. Women, medics, and slaves are out. Historians still question whether the true demos, people, included only free men or whether certain marginalized groups could indirectly influence decisions through patrons. This gap highlights the paradox of democracy that excludes half the population. Suddenly, the sound of a rudimentary drum echoes to signal the transition to the next topic, war expenses against Corinth. The cadence is hypnotic, as if someone has pressed a loop button on a soundtrack. You feel your chest vibrate with each beat, an invitation to focus on the numbers and forget the heat still weighing on your shoulders. All around him, whispers are swirling about relief payments for veterans, a pioneering benefit that guaranteed pensions to those who fought at Marathon and Plataea. Mainstream fact, The law of salamis, passed in 493 BCE, was the first to set aside public funds for ongoing military support, a precursor to modern pensions. You get the impression that instead of a structured debate, you're watching an improvised battle, each speaker trying to outdo the other in rhetoric and level of outrage. Joke 3. If this were a game show, they'd already have box seats and olive oil sponsors. When the time comes for the verdict, the president raises his scepter and calls for silence. The final votes are cast, and you can almost hear the clink of each fragment of clay. The result is announced. The walls will be repaired, but the allocation of funds will be reviewed again in 6 months. You take a deep breath and realize that, despite the confusion, each citizen leaves with the feeling of having been part of something bigger. As you walk downhill, you feel a fresh wind that carries the scent of wild thyme from the fields. You reflect that, despite all the chaos, this exercise in egalitarian voice was so revolutionary that it serves as a model for many systems to this day. Academic debate. Scholars still debate whether Athenian democracy directly influenced modern republics, or whether it was just a one-off experiment with no organic continuity. You look out over the horizon, where the sun is beginning to set over the Parthenon, turning the columns a soft orange. Every step you take seems to echo the importance of this moment, as if you carry within you the spirit of the polis. And then you ask yourself, could you survive a whole day immersed in this participatory chaos? Maybe you could, if you keep your voting stones close by and keep an open mind. Or maybe you couldn't, if you couldn't bear to make decisions under public outcry. Either way, now you know what it's like to feel the weight and fortune of living in a true battlefield democracy. You arrive at a small makeshift clinic next to the city walls, where pieces of wood serve as stretchers and clay pots pour a myriad of strange liquids. Medicine in ancient Greece was far from the sterile hospitals you know. It was a mix of ritual, superstition, and empirical observation. Historical fact. Around 430 BC, Hippocrates, considered the father of medicine, already taught the theory of the 4 humors, stating that the balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile determined the health of the body. You sit on a backless wooden stool and watch a wispy-bearded doctor prepare a green potion in a bronze mortar. The sound of the pestle against the bowl echoes rhythmically, almost hypnotically, as he grinds medicinal herbs, an ASMR experience of metallic tapping. Fun fact, poppy leaves were crushed to produce a rudimentary sedative, a proto-analgesic used even in trauma surgery. You think that a little bit of this archaic poppy would be worth including in your modern first aid kit. The doctor looks at you and asks what hurts, using a calm, soothing tone. When you mention a heaviness in your chest, a light joke, if scratching were medicine, you'd be cured by now. He presses some chopped herbs against your skin through linen gauze. The plant releases a bitter, earthy aroma that makes your nose wrinkle. Meanwhile, he takes your pulse, a practice that Hippocrates is said to have introduced to diagnose internal illnesses by observing rhythm and strength. Historians still debate whether this technique was inspired by Egyptian pulse tests or developed independently by the Greeks. Suddenly, an assistant enters carrying ceramic jars of reddish liquid. These are bloodletting, the method of drawing blood to alleviate excess humor. You watch the procedure with curiosity and a slight chill down your spine as the sharp blade grazes your skin before letting the blood flow. Joke 2. If you think your last blood test was cold, try imagining a cut made without modern anesthesia. The scene takes on a dramatic air when drops drip into a bowl, producing a slightly metallic sound that splashes your imaginary ASMR. As the blood flows, the doctor talks about using heated clay cups to suck toxins out of the skin. He precisely positions them on a patient's back, creating tiny bubbles that leave circular red marks. You smell the warm ceramic mixed with the aroma of burning herbs, a sensory contrast quite different from your typical spa body scrub. Fun fact, cupping techniques evolved, and centuries later, Hippocrates would recommend circling the cups with honey to help them stick, an extra precaution reminiscent of modern silicone adhesives. A beggar comes in leaning on a stick, begging for help with his knee pain. The doctor studies his posture and decides to apply a crushed fermented fish claw, a smelly poultice that promised to reduce inflammation. You watch as the poultice is prepared, remembering the exotic delicacy from the tavern. but this time without the tasty part. Joke number 3. If you think exfoliating with coffee is intense, try a fermented fish compress. As the poultice works, it comments on medical debates. Historians still argue whether the practice of poultices was truly effective or just a powerful placebo for the desperate patient. Suddenly, a scream cuts through the room. Someone is bringing in a young soldier with a wound on his shoulder, the result of Spartan training. The doctor is cleaning the wound with vinegar diluted in hot water, a common practice for disinfecting before modern antiseptics were invented. You grimace as the soldier winces, and the sound of the cloth rubbing his skin echoes like a soft crack. This method of cleansing was advocated by Galen centuries later, but historians still debate whether using vinegar actually reduced infection or caused more pain than relief. The soldier, groaning in pain, is then anesthetized with a puff of poppy smoke mixed with dried hemp, inhaled through a bronze tube. You stand back, watching the spectacle of smoke dancing in the air, creating patterns that resemble sand art. Marginal curiosity. Records indicate that hemp was used as an antispasmodic, but it was also viewed with suspicion by some Greek doctors who feared mental alterations. Historians still question whether these smokes were regulated or whether each practice varied from city-state to city-state. As the patient begins to doze off, the doctor begins to suture the wound with a bone needle and thread made from animal intestine. The sound of gentle stings piercing the flesh is barely audible, but your attention is drawn to the delicate hum of each stitch. You wonder how long it would take your Instagram to load a video of this detailed suturing. Academic debate. Scholars debate the extent to which these rudimentary sutures prevented postoperative mortality or caused more infections than they cured. Meanwhile, another patient awaits a skull scraping, a trepanation practice used to relieve chronic headaches or drive out evil spirits. You witness bone particles being removed with a bronze tool, creating a fine powder that falls silently into a basin. The mood grows tense, but the doctor keeps his voice low and measured, explaining each step. Fun fact, trepanations have been found in skulls from several regions of Greece, with surprisingly high healing rates, indicating that many patients survived the procedure. Historians still debate whether the result was the result of exceptional technique or simply human resilience. After scraping, the doctor applies an ointment made of beeswax and pine resin, sealing the opening to prevent infection. You can smell the sweet, resinous smell that contrasts with the moist, physiological environment. As you watch, the doctor comments on a debate between rival schools of medicine. Some argue that the ointment was essential to prevent sepsis, while others believe that covering the hole would prevent the natural drainage of ill humors. As the last patient is discharged, you stand up with a slight tremor in your legs. The mix of smells, the sound of instruments, and nervous laughter still echoes in your mind. You touch your skin, imagining the marks the suction cups would leave, a permanent reminder of this quasi-surgical experience. And then you wonder, could you survive a full day of primitive medicine without the comfort of a modern painkiller or adhesive bandage? Maybe you could if you had a strong will and a strong stomach. Or maybe you couldn't if your modern body rebels against these rusty practices. You step out of the clinic and take a deep breath of the fresh street air, feeling a gentle relief that slows your heart. The evening light bathes the white walls of the city, and each step back to your contemporary mattress now feels like a spa trip compared to what you just experienced. You wake up in a cold stone dormitory, feeling each seam of your woolen tunic press against your skin like an unwelcoming embrace. The faint light of dawn filters through the cracks in the narrow window, revealing a row of togas hanging on makeshift hooks. Today is the day to get dressed and walk the white limestone streets. But even before you adjust the fabric, you feel a flicker of regret at the rough feel against your skin. Just kidding. If you think cinching your skinny jeans is a modern ordeal, wait until you find out that togas came without elastic. The toga, worn as official attire by free citizens, was usually made of raw wool, rolled and draped around the body in a circular motion. Mainstream historical fact. In Rome, this garment became a status symbol only after the 3rd century BC, but in Greece the garments the drapes were derived from the Thracian people's cloaks, with patterns of folds that looked like body origami. You stretch out your arms, trying to smooth out the folds, and almost suffocate in the excess fabric. Marginal curiosity. Some togas had hems dyed Tyrian purple, costing as much as a pair of leather sandals, a luxury that probably only the emperor could afford. After minutes of choreographed wrestling, you managed to get it functionally wound up and step out in the courtyard, the edges scraping behind your knees with each step. Your feet slip into the sandals, thin strips of leather tied in simple knots at the ankle. As you squeeze the hardened leather, an archer approaches to calibrate your bow. But all you can think is that putting on these sandals would be a good test of your sanity. Joke 2. In the modern world, we use break-in for new shoes. Here, you broke yours. Face. You shuffle along the uneven stone sidewalk, feeling each bump echo like a drum against your arch. Each strip of leather cuts into the side of your foot, creating blisters that heat up with pain as a constant reminder that comfort was not a priority in the past. Historians still debate whether the simple lacing system was a matter of practicality for cleaning shoes or whether it was the result of a lack of technical knowledge to produce more sophisticated buckles. You swing your foot as if dancing an awkward minuet, try to find relief in the constant balancing. As you walk through the narrow streets, you watch women and men adjusting the intricate robes that could be mistaken for contortionism. A lanky gentleman comments that the garments serve as protection from the strong sun, but you realize that protecting yourself from the heat at the cost of bleeding from your feet might not be a good idea. Fun fact, some travelers recommended wearing linen pads under the straps of your shoes to prevent blisters, a practice that could have saved thousands of feet if only someone had invented it sooner. The cool breeze contrasts with the heat generated by friction, creating the thermal sensation of a portable sauna. You reach a square where artisans sell lighter linen fabrics brought from Egypt. The vendor teases you. Linen tunic? No more wool that stings against your skin. You test the feel and almost sigh with pleasure, but then remember that you need to change your toga, something that would involve taking apart and reassembling an entire living room rug. Academic debate. Experts disagree on whether the predominance of wool had to do with climate or with symbolism of power, since linen production was restricted and controlled, making it accessible only to the most privileged. Meanwhile, a veteran soldier passes by wearing metal-reinforced sandals for long marches. You watch him enviously and imagine having a pair of those. But then you think that if metal hurts less than leather, maybe it's because the weight makes your feet forget the pain of fatigue. Joke 3. At your office job, you found high heels a challenge. Here, iron shoes would be an upgrade. Over time, the sun warms the limestone floor, reflecting heat into the leather straps and burning the soles of your feet. You try to step into the shadows cast by the columns, but they move too quickly to keep up with your limp. You feel the fine grain of sand beneath your heels, each particle a grain of torture. The creak of the metal shackles hanging from the knees of slaves echoes in the background. You realize that even they, without freedom, had no choice in their shoes and perhaps hated each step even more. You finally reach the edge of a pool of fresh water, a rare chance to dip your feet in and wash away the sweat and blood that has accumulated. The cold sensation burns as much as the heat before, but you lean in and dip your feet in, feeling your skin tighten with each drop. The faint scent of mint that someone has spread to ward off mosquitoes makes you lift your head and take a deep breath. Perhaps this is the first real respite of comfort of the day. All around you, you see boys playing with bay leaves in the air, running barefoot and laughing at the freedom their feet don't know. A curious fact, it was common to walk barefoot indoors, but on the street, the practice was seen as a sign of poverty or lack of citizenship. You think that perhaps you should have been born a peasant to avoid the urban fashion of suffering. Recovered, you decide to return to official activities, but now each step is meditated. You discreetly adjust your toga to ease the friction inside and walk slowly, almost in slow motion. With each movement, you feel the folds rubbing against your arm and the straps tightening against your chest. It is a choreography of discomfort whose rhythm you would only like to abandon. Then a police officer, a rare but authorized woman in certain cities, walks past you wearing padded felt sandals, royal patterns that protected her feet during patrols. You wonder why no one invented this marvel for the rest of the population. Academic debate. Some scholars argue that public policies to distribute comfortable footwear existed sporadically, but were abandoned due to cost. Others argue that they were symbolic concessions to grant moral authority to certain classes. You sigh, contemplating the irony of living in a world that values elegance over physical dignity. Your scratched skin throbs with every small bump, and you wonder how many people have given up walking across town because of this. Perhaps out of convenience or happenstance, you realize how modern shoes are a miracle of comfort that is often overlooked. Even today, as the sun sets, the temperature drops, and the cool air helps soothe the burning. You trudge back to your dorm, dragging yourself along like a castaway rescued by a mattress. As you kick off your sandals, you notice that your blisters have glowed a deep crimson, macabre jewels of daily sacrifice. You massage each sore spot carefully, wishing for less aggressive stitching and supple leather straps. Before falling asleep, you touch the hanging toga and grimace. Tomorrow, at the very least, you'll try to improvise a soft fabric lining before putting it back on. But the big lesson is a simple question. Could you survive a whole day of parading in clothes that look like torture devices? Maybe you could, if your courage was stronger than your blisters. Or maybe you couldn't, if you found a perfect excuse to wear modern flip-flops to the next reenactment festival. Either way, your feet will never look at sandals the same way again. You disembark at the port. You arrive at the Piraeus docks at dawn, when a thin mist rolls over the blue-gray water. Lines of triremes bob like fish on ropes, ready to set sail. The shrill clang of iron onward announces the loading of amphorae of wine and olives. Historically, Greek triremes, equipped with 3 rows of oarsmen, were known to reach speeds of up to 7 knots, an impressive speed for wooden vessels nearly 40 meters long. As you step onto the slightly undulating deck, you can smell the salty smell of the sea, along with the fine mist of pitch that insists on clinging to your eyelashes. The creaking wood beneath your feet creates an almost musical rhythm, but also warns you that each step must be taken with caution. A side note, sailors used to tar their cables to prevent them from fraying in the salt. It is said that the strong smell of resin was so characteristic that it served as the official perfume of the fleets. The captain, a man in light armor and a scruffy beard, pulls out his hand for you to climb aboard one of the rudimentary prows. As you gaze at the horizon, you notice small fishing boats gliding parallel to each other, ignoring the tall sails catching the trade wind. Light joke, if you complain about the rocking of your fishing boat on the lake, wait until you feel the rocking of a trireme full of soldiers. Even your stomach will be asking for it. Help! The Aegean Sea opens up before you, and the rowers begin to chant rhythmically to synchronize their strokes. The harmony of their collective effort echoes like a drum, propelling the ship forward. Historians still debate whether these chants were simple calls for rhythm or incorporated religious symbols to ask for protection from the gods, such as Pos Dr. You hold on tight to a wooden bulwark, try not to slip as the salt drops appear on the deck. As the wind blows from the stern, you close your eyes for a moment, and then, at the edge of the fog, the dark silhouette of a Phoenician freighter appears. The captain frowns. Piracy in the Mediterranean was so common that Phoenician became synonymous with plunderer, marginal curiosity. Some sailors claim that scouts sent messages by throwing bottles at the sea, one of the first means of long-distance communication. Joke 2. In your WhatsApp group, a sticker would be enough to warn about the enemy's ship. Here, it was a message adrift. Good luck if anyone found it. Tension mounts as the Phoenician appears to port, her black sails nearly sucking up the sunlight. The captain gives orders, and the helmsman turns the forward anchor, positioning the bow for attack. You feel the weight of the shield hanging from your hip, ready to seize any gap in the enemy's hull. Historians still debate whether the famous bronze rat, a trench lance used in naval battles, was actually native to the Greeks or a borrowing from the Carthaginians. It was clacking the water as the 2 ships approach. A smaller wave ripples the deck and makes your heart pound. The captain orders the bow strike, the giant bronze rosters that pierce enemy hulls. You grip the wooden bar, imagining the imminent impact. When the hulls meet, the crash is so loud that the oars vibrate in your arms. Your entire body shakes, and for a moment you almost think you're in an earthquake, but it's just the ships crashing together. As you try to keep your balance, You see Phoenician sailors descending on makeshift ropes to the Greek deck. The smell of burning leather and primitive gunpowder mixes with the salt. Marginal curiosity. Some ancient descriptions mention the use of Greek fire, an incendiary mixture thrown from bronze tubes. But scholars debate to this day whether this weapon existed in the form described or whether it was an exaggeration by chroniclers. You raise your shield and ready your short spear, feeling the cold metal vibrate against the wood. A Phoenician soldier steps forward, and you slam your spear into his chest with a dull thud. Nothing compared to how hateful tweet would be received today. Joke 3. In the modern world, a heated online argument is nearly lethal. Here, anyone without a spear was literally struck down. The battle lasts what feels like an eternity compressed into seconds. You feel every muscle burn and every drop of sweat trickle down the back of your neck. The captain shouts instructions while other oarsmen maintain the ship's momentum, ensuring you don't suffer a surprise impact. After a final push of the rostra, the Phoenician ship pulls away, barnacled and scoring a cautious victory. With triumph, the sails are hoisted again, and you lean forward to peer into the deep blue beneath the hull. The world seems bigger and more dangerous than any modern news feed. You swallow hard as you take in the vastness of the sea, realizing that without a pocket GPS, navigation depended on the stars, and a lot of experience. Historians still debate whether navigators used fixed constellations or preferred coastal navigation, techniques closer to land to avoid shipwreck. As the day progresses, dark clouds appear on the horizon. The crew exchange apprehensive glances. Storms in the Mediterranean can arise in minutes. Soon, distant thunder rumbles and the wind picks up in violent gusts. The captain yells to adjust the sails, trying to reduce the exposed surface. You feel the crack of the masts tilting and the water starting to weigh your chest. The first drops fall and grow into thick drops that run down the deck, making the wood slippery. The hull rocks heavily, and each step becomes a test of balance. The sails, now almost horizontal, seem to want to come loose and fly into the gray sky. You reach for a loose rope to hold on, and in the process, you're almost swept away by a wave that splashes over the rail. As the rain falls in sheets, you smell the ozone and the sea mix together, an electric mix that makes you feel alive despite your fear. Fun fact, ancient sailors believed that the songs of certain seabirds before a storm foretold bad weather, a kind of natural barometer that even modern meteorology can't fully replicate. The storm reaches its peak as lightning streaks across the sky and thunder shakes the hull like war drums. You crouch down, gripping the rail tightly, and try to breathe slowly to keep from panicking. Historians still debate whether the techniques of rigging sails and repairing masts were passed down through formal schools or by itinerant master craftsmen. Eventually, the fury of the winds subsides as quickly as it began. When you look up, you see a shy rainbow appearing on the horizon, a rare and magnetic sight. The group lets out a collective sigh of relief, and the commander gives a brief compliment. We survived another day. You get up, your body aching, but your heart beating with gratitude for life. Each drop of salt water running down the oars dances like the notes of a silent victory song. You wonder, could you survive a whole day of battling pirates, bronze rosters, and sudden storms? Maybe you could if you brought a protective amulet, or maybe you couldn't if your modern stomach gave out at the first lurch. And as you gaze out at the calm sea after the storm, you realize that sailing in ancient Greece was an act of courage and faith, a reminder that even today, our connection to the ocean is part of who we are. You walk between shadowy pillars to the heart of the public forum, where stained cloths mark the place of punishment. The sun reflects off the cold metal of hanging chains and the dry dust that accumulates on the floor, raising small clouds with each step you take. Light joke, if you think supermarket lines are long, try waiting your turn to hear the sentencing to the applause of the crowd. An executioner adjusts his black hood while a lightly armored guard hits a wooden post with his club, creating a spine-chilling thud sound, almost like a macabre ASMR. Historical fact, in classical Athens, public punishments such as flogging and temporary banishment in living statues, stavrosis, were common, and a criminal was put on display to serve as a social warning. Historians still debate whether this ritual was truly intended to deliver justice or simply reinforce a spectacle of fear among the citizens. As the crowd gathers, you can smell the smoke of incense, provided to soothe nervous minds, mingling with the salty odor of human sweat. A side note, on nearby stone columns, unlicensed preachers have been spreading sheets emblazoned with red armbands, warning that Sunday would be Hangman's Day, an event marked on the civic calendar. You almost expect to see a digital banner flashing, "Don't click here." The defendant appears under escort, staggering in worn sandals and wearing a torn tunic. You recognize the face of the young man who swore loyalty to a rival politician at the Knicks. Remember that mess of ceramic urns? Now he pays the price. As he is placed in front of the lamppost, he lifts his chin, trying not to show any tremor. Joke 2. If today you think cancellation is brutal, know that in ancient Greece, the no-clip did not save you from slaps in the face. The executioner pulls out a long whip made of hardened leather strips and checks each segment with a sharp crack. When he raises the whip, the stinging sound seems to float through the hot air, sending a collective shiver through your body. Your heart beats in your ears, and your hands sweat, as if you were going to the dentist without anesthesia. Historians still question whether the number of lashes was standardized or varied according to the mood of the assembly. The first blow rips through space with a sharp crack, and you even feel a reverberation behind your temporal bone, a reminder that the defendant's body vibrates like a lyre's string struck on. The audience lets out a synchronized gasp that sounds like waves crashing into a sea of voices. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to filter out the sound as if it were white noise, but it's no use. The ASMR of pain is contagious. As the executioner prepares the second blow, you watch the despair in the condemned man's eyes. Joke 3. In your last bar fight, you may have lost a tooth. Here, you may lose your dignity, and perhaps a few more ribs. Leather slaps, cracks, and cords will come loose from his tunic, leaving exposed red marks on his shoulder. You feel a physical discomfort almost out of sympathy, a tingling of empathy that makes the whole scene swirl in your mind. Ahead, a woman whispers to her friend, "I heard he stole a silver idol from a temple." You remember the scent of incense at that spring ceremony, a twist of fate. Historians still debate whether these idols were simply religious mementos or had such high commercial value that the theft amounted to confiscation of wealth. When the executioner pauses, you take a deep breath, listening to the sound of the wind shaking tents and the distant jingle of chains. The crowd only rests for a moment. In a space between one whip and the next, you almost feel like you're at one of those raucous festivals of Dionysus, but without the benefit of the wine. This momentary silence shows how the audience thrives on tension, like waiting for the climax of a thriller. The defendant falls to his knees, his buttocks scarred as bright red as scraped granite. The guards lift him up and push him into the center of a stone circle, where he must recite a public confession, an exercise in verbal humiliation. He utters broken words, asking the city for forgiveness and promising not to violate the gods. The echo of his trembling voice spreads across the courtyard like the beat of a martial drum. A little joke to remind you. If you complain about public speaking at work, imagine having to confess your sins under the gaze of spectacle-hungry spectators. When you're done, a makeshift carriage takes you to the nearby prison, a dark, damp dungeon carved into the living rock. You watch the scene unfold, each stone feeling raw beneath your bare feet, a grim reminder of your tight sandals. In a hallway, drops of water drip from the low ceiling, producing a rhythmic sound that could be an improvised beat from an ancient-style drum machine. A sideways curiosity. Caged prisoners were kept under constant guard, but some managed to send notes hidden in bread carried by the guards, exchanging stories with the outside world. Inside the cell, the condemned man encounters other pale and tired faces, whispering the names of protective gods and verses from Homer to keep themselves sane. The strong smell of damp mixed with the remains of barley rations creates an uninviting aroma, but one that you recognize as the routine of many prisoners. Academic debates still investigate whether prison sentences were truly punitive in nature or whether they served merely as an intermediate stage before hard labor or execution. You step away from the dungeon and peer through the crack in the door, thinking how lucky you are to be back in a modern bed in a moment. As the sun sets, the torches light up, casting flickering shadows on the walls. It's a stark reminder that in this society, justice is confused with spectacle and punishment with entertainment. You swallow hard. Would you dare step foot in that whipping circus unless it was because of an irreversible addiction to live drama? As you walk away, you feel the dust from the stones settle on your shoulders, creating a thin layer of historical dust. You take a deep breath, feeling the dry taste of earth in your throat, and think about how many laws you would break today without knowing it. After all, would you survive a day in ancient Greece knowing that the price of a mistake could be publicly carved into your flesh? You turn onto the busy street, where vendors pack their last wares of the day. Remember the burning market, the public baths, the philosophical debates, and even the pain of sailing, but nothing was as shocking as witnessing legalized cruelty. In the end, you realize that your modern comforts are not limited to hot water or a soft toga, but the security of not having to worry about posts on the executioner's social network. And then you ask yourself, would you last a whole day in this court of pain? Maybe you could, if you could maintain some emotional distance, or maybe not, if your threshold for modern horror is very low. In any case, this chapter of public humiliation will be etched in your memory for a long time. You step through the festive portal and find yourself in a collective ecstasy of singing, flowing wine, and colorful masks. You are in the heart of the Great Dionysiacs, a festival in honor of Dionysus that took place every 4 years in Athens, bringing together crowds for processions, ecstatic dances, and tragedy competitions. Historical fact, the urban Dionysiacs attracted up to 10,000 spectators, who crowded into the Dionysian theater to hear the new plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides in a carnival culture without equal. As you enter the open-air venue, you're met with the strong aroma of wine mixed with myrrh incense, creating a perfume that will destroy your modern sense of smell. But hey, it's part of the show. Light joke, if your last music festival gave you a half-hour hangover, try drinking liters of wine mixed with honey and spices while jumping around masked strangers. Your liver will say unsubscribed. Marble statues of Dionysus line the entrance, draped in ivy garlands and grapes hanging like pagan Christmas ornaments. Fun fact, some devotees believe that eating sacred grapes during the procession granted prophetic visions that had nothing to do with wine, but no one could tell the difference. You bite into one of these grapes, savoring the exotic sweetness, and wondering if some modern-day influencer would unbox grapes that make you talk to gods. As you move forward, you hear rawhide, drums being played by men and women dancing in trance. The dirt floor trembles beneath your robes, and you feel the vibrations run up your spine like a surround sound upgrade without the need for a hi-fi system. Historians still debate whether the rhythm of the drums imitated heartbeats. Was the idea of synchronizing body and spirit primitive biofeedback or simple mass hysteria? Soon you see a procession of masked actors acting out fragments of tragedies. Choirs lament tragic kings while you try to decipher whether it's theater or avant-garde retrowave. Joke 2. Imagine putting subtitles on a festival live stream. King Oedipus discovered the wrong paternity. Swipe up to save your sanity. You step back a little to get a better look, but trip over an empty wine barrel that rolls under your feet and take an epic dive into a spray of residual liquid. It would be funny if you weren't dying of embarrassment. The central area is taken up by long tables, where groups compete in a wine race. Each participant must drink as much as they want and complete a zigzag route. Fun fact, drinking races were sanctioned by summary law in Athens to test the endurance of young men and identify future Athenians who were brave enough to fight, or at least willing to endure a collective hangover. You hold your glass carefully, imagining the strong taste of carrion wine, and wonder if this recruiting technique would be effective in 21st century law enforcement. Seeing your hesitation, one of the participants takes a deafening gulp and looks at you with a defiant smile. You accept the glass, raise your toast, and drink it in one gulp. The fruity taste explodes in your throat, and your brain hesitates between ecstasy and regret. Joke 3. If today you cry because of tequila, try an old-fashioned wine with 14 degrees and notes of dried figs. Your stomach will compose your epitaph. Your world spins as you try to walk along the path marked out with pieces of pottery. People cheer you on, some beat drums, others throw rose petals to celebrate each average step you manage to take without falling face down. You remember that women were excluded from these competitions, but there are reports, still debated, that slaves and meticulous women dressed up and participated in disguise. Academic debate. Historians still question whether there was a veiled inclusion or whether these narratives are late inventions by sympathetic chroniclers. Further on, a group plays bamboo flutes and bronze cymbals, marking the beginning of a ritual ecstasy. Participants carry wooden bulls in procession, improvising shouts and chants in honor of the god. A marginal curiosity. Some later festivals included real bull sacrifices. Roman bullfighting was a late heir to these practices, but in Athens the symbolic version was enough to ignite the crowd. You imitate the collective cry, raising your arms as if you were an influencer promoting a live show, and feel your skin crawl with the shared energy. In a reserved space, poets recite Dionysian hymns, intoned in archaic Greek so quickly that your brain instantly misses automatic subtitles. You close your eyes and let yourself be enveloped by the melodic sound, experiencing a gentle trance, almost meditative. This contrast between wine and poetry reminds us of how the festival mixed ecstasy and reflection. The tragedy sought to purge emotions through catharsis. Historians still debate whether the catharsis described by Aristotle was the result of collective tears or merely a planned dramatic effect. As you explore, you sample a piece of sweet bread dipped in thyme honey, offered by devotees as an offering to the altar. The sweet and sour contrast soothes the palate and restores some sanity. Fun fact, flower essences were added to the honey to create regional flavors, an ancient sensory marketing technique that still appears on high-end menus today. You munch with pleasure, wondering if today's supermarket snack odds could learn from these combinations. Finally, a procession heads to Mount Ares to light a large ceremonial bonfire. The rising flames illuminate Dionysian mass hanging from trees and reflect in the ecstatic eyes of the participants. You feel the comforting warmth contrasting with the coolness of the night, and for an instant, recognize the collective strength of that moment. Academic debate. Scholars question whether the act of jumping over the flames was just a legend or whether young people really participated in this rite. Perhaps it depended on who wrote the story. Exhausted, you sit on a stone block next to feverish strangers, sharing a last glass of cinnamon-spiced wine. The sound of the chanting fades, leaving only the crackling of logs and the distant echo of drums. You smile, feeling the euphoria give way to a comforting calm, like an impromptu nocturnal ASMR. When you finally decide to leave, you lean against the statue of Dionysus, still adorned with wilted ivy. You take a deep breath of the sweet festival air and wonder, could you survive a full day of ritual ecstasy fueled by wine, dancing, and tragedy? Maybe you could if you brought an extra bottle of mineral water. Or maybe you couldn't if your liver or your sense of social graces couldn't handle the intoxicating marathon. Either way, this night in the halls of Dionysus will leave its mark on your body, your mind, and, no doubt, your best stories to tell if you wake up tomorrow. You walk through the imposing doors of a grand domus in the city center and immediately feel the contrast between the polished marble floor beneath your bare feet and the gritty pavement of the streets outside. On one side, bustling servants carry gleaming silver trays. On the other, slaves in shabby clothes push carts, groaning under the weight of barrels of olive oil. This social divide was so stark that in 5th century BC Athens, only citizens born of Athenian parents could vote and own property. Medics, resident aliens, and slaves were excluded from citizenship altogether. As you walk through the atrium, you notice the stone mosaics depicting scenes of hunting and lavish banquets. The light breeze that comes through the open windows carries the sweet scent of laurel incense used in private ceremonies, a luxury unaffordable to the poor. Fun fact, in the homes of wealthy families, intimate symposia were common, where guests would recline on triclinia and enjoy trumpet bread, a thin shell-shaped biscuit, while discussing politics and philosophy. You sit on a wooden lectus lined with cushions of linen dyed purple, a pigment so expensive it was worth more than a skilled slave. Your fingers glide over the soft fabric, producing a soft sigh in the silent room, a true ASMR of ancient luxury. The servants approach silently and offer you cups of wine mixed with honey from thyme. whose herbaceous aroma contrasts with the burning breath of alcohol. You take a light sip, feeling the heat spread down your throat, while you peek at the people around you. On the other side of the portico, you can see a simple wing where families of agricultural workers wait outside, in line, begging for alms or permission to deliver their produce to market. You can hear the harshness of the wind carrying dust and the distant moaning of children licking empty bowls, a grim reminder that most lived on the fringes of urban comfort. Academic debate. Historians still debate whether democratic Athens mitigated these inequalities through careful mistophoria, payment of salaries to Jews, or whether this benefit merely served to maintain the illusion of civic participation. As you walk down a hallway lined with bronze statues of prominent ancestors, you hear a muffled noise, the clank of iron chains coming from an inner wing. The elderly woman who lives there as a slave remembered Hippocrates' teachings about caring for the sick, but now she carries urns of coal to heat the hypocaust, the heating system beneath the floor, as her bones creak under the strain. You almost shudder with empathy. But remember, Greek survival, a content creator would think today. In the main room, a young patrician recites verses from Homer to a circle of scholars holding scrolls. You approach and notice that, just behind him, a few children from several families are receiving instruction and rudimentary reading, a rare exception, since formal education was privileged only for the free male elite. Light joke. If you thought your last Chinese lesson was difficult, imagine learning to recite the Iliad while holding a jug of hot oil without spilling a drop. Sunlight streams through stained glass windows, a rare innovation in Greece, more common in Egyptian temples, casting reflections that dance across the limestone columns. The contrast between light and shadow seems to symbolize the social tensions at play. A sideways curiosity. Some domes used polished bronze mirrors to redirect sunlight, an engineering trick that amplified natural brightness without relying on torches. You can hear the murmur of political discussions coming from the walls, lords debating taxes and grain distribution, while slaves organize goods in the antechambers, almost invisible to the eyes of the guests. Academic debate. Scholars question whether these private meetings influence public laws or whether they were merely forums for collusion between powerful families, leaving popular democracy as a facade. The scent of beeswax from the lit lamps mingles with the scent of jasmine imported from Syria, a luxury so expensive that many would rather endure the darkness. You touch the hot wax formed in the small pots and feel the heat dissipate through your fingers, an unexpected ASMR that makes you let out a small chuckle. Joke 2. If you think your scented candles are fancy, try a blend of cedar resin and jasmine diluted in olive oil, and don't spill anything, or you'll be thrown out of the room. When you enter a smaller room, you see an even more pronounced stratification. 3 children playing with obstacle boards, while enslaved boys clean the playground of broken slates and scattered pieces. You hear the dull sound of the pottery being picked up and almost cry with indignation. Or is it an ASMR emotion of moral questioning? Historians still debate whether these obstacle games, used to register votes, were more entertainment or a political ritual to teach citizenship. Finally, you find an inner courtyard with the elite lounge beneath pergolas woven from vines and mulberry trees. The coolness of the leaves creates a constant whisper above your head, a subtle sound carpet that contrasts with the clamor outside. Servants take care to trim nails and comb hair, a service that would today resemble a 5-star spa service. You close your eyes for a moment, absorbing the gentle warmth and hum of the leaves, an ASMR of aristocratic retreat. As you get up to leave, you feel the difference between the protective shade of the pergolas and the cutting sun that shines down on the alley, where a bunch of slaves wait for orders. You take a deep breath of the air heavy with dust and sweat, and ask yourself, would you survive an entire day knowing that your worth was determined by birth and fortune? Maybe you would, if you had a weekly financial subsidy. Or maybe you wouldn't, if your conscience couldn't handle the dissonance between luxury and servitude. You return to the main street, feeling the heat of the market and the smell of spices mingling with the vegetal perfume of the pergolas you left behind. The social contrast still throbs in your mind like a rhythmic drum. And as you walk, you know, in ancient Greece, true democracy had the smooth faces of the powerful and the calloused hands of the invisible. You may not last a day in this maze of privilege and deprivation, But at least you now understand the cost of this precarious balance. You arrive at the grand open-air theater, carved into the side of a hill, and immediately feel the cold of the rough stones beneath your bare legs. The marble stands, stacked in a semicircle, form a silent shell that amplifies the slightest whisper, an impressive historical fact. The Theater of Dionysus in Athens, built in the 5th century BC, accommodated up to 17,000 spectators and served as the stage for the first Greek tragedies. As you make your way up the steep steps, you'll be reminded of the discomfort of tight sandals and the scorching sun of the market. Hello? Section 1. To this day, many tourists are unaware that these seats never had backrests, a marginal curiosity. Wealthier spectators brought handmade leather cushions, called folia, to cushion the impact of hours of sitting. Sitting, you try to adjust your posture, but end up slipping a few inches with each clap in an ASMR stone creaking effect that makes your body shudder. The sun shines lightly on the cavia, making its shade a sought-after refuge. You move from bench to bench, like someone on a live tour, looking for a cool spot. Light joke, it would be easier to find air conditioning in an abandoned temple than comfort in this open-air auditorium. As the shiny ceramic masks hang from hooks around the stage, you notice the contrast between refined art and inhospitable concrete. The murmur increases as the chorus begins to sing the play's prologue. The acoustics are so perfect that you hear every sibilant syllable as if you were standing inches away from the speaker. Despite the 50-meter radius, historians still debate whether the circular design was the result of mathematical calculation or pure artistic intuition. You close your eyes and enjoy the piercing sound, almost like vocal ASMR, even though you know the next scene is going to be brutal. In the center of the orchestra, masked actors bring to life gods and heroes. Each step echoes on the dirt floor, raising clouds of dust that dance in the light of the setting sun. Joke 2. Think of one of those modern concerts where smoke rises from the stage to create atmosphere. Only here it's pure historical dust sticking to your nostrils. You swallow a cloud of dirt without meaning to, tasting the dry taste of centuries. As the tragedy unfolds, an old man sits next to you, dozing and snoring softly. The combination of the creaking of the stone tablets and the snoring creates an unplanned symphony, a marginal curiosity that makes some spectators chuckle. You try hard not to look, but the ASMR of the snoring contrasts so well with the distress of the characters on stage that it almost becomes part of the show. The plot involves betrayal, bloodshed, and revenge, the hero tragically cursed by his own quest for justice. Your heart sinks, remembering the fear of being whipped in Section 10, and a chill runs down your spine. Academic debate. Scholars still debate the extent to which the tragedies were performed according to the original text or improvised by the actors, since many original scripts may have been modified from handwritten posters at the time. Hurry! Then the choir sings a festive dithyramb to introduce the comedy. Half the audience leaves to get more wine in the atrium. You hesitate, but end up staying to see the contrast. Joke 3. Imagine someone today saying, "I'll only be back after the comedy trailer." Here, it was literally that a wine break between tragedy and laughter. The comic actors wore grotesque masks and used shrill voices, making those who still resist laugh. The exaggerated hand movements, combined with the natural echo of the theater, create an almost life-size cartoon effect. You don't know if you're watching a primitive stand-up or a live TikTok without subtitles. Meanwhile, the wind blows in gusts from the nearby sea, bringing a coolness that interacts with the suspended dust, forming small spirals that pass between the spectators' legs. Interesting fact, in Sicily, some theaters were positioned to take advantage of sea breezes as natural air, anticipating sustainable air conditioning long before the invention of aqueducts. When the play ends, the audience rises to their feet in unison, cracking joints and pushing benches against one another. The collective sound of footsteps rumbles like the beat of an improvised drum, a strange ASMR of masses in motion. You join the crowd, your body stiff from sitting for so long, and realize that the entire experience has been a challenge of sensory endurance. As you descend the slope, your shadow stretches across the grandstand as the sun sets over the torchlit proscenium. You reflect that if you survive this sea of stone, creaking, and dust, you might deserve a Medal of Honor for historical achievement, or at the very least a good modern vibrating massager. Your body aches, but your spirit is energized. It's been a full day of outdoor drama, complete with natural sound effects and unrehearsed improvisations. As you walk out of the theater, you taste the lingering dust on your lips and hear the distant echo of the chorus's final line, Memento audire. You remember the taunt of the fermented fish vendor from Section 3 and smile. Some things never change, not even in art. You whisper to yourself, could I survive another day here? Maybe you could if you brought a cushioned seat and noise-canceling headphones. Or maybe you couldn't if your modern body refused to cooperate. And with that, you descend the steps towards the exit gate, feeling the liturgy of the theater echo like a final breath. The experience was intense, raw, and, above all, unforgettable. You pass through a narrow corridor and enter a half-buried room, whose low ceiling is supported by rough stone columns. Flickering torches cast dancing shadows on the walls covered in paintings of gods and monsters, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Here, at the Oracle of Delphi, superstition reigns supreme. In fact, since the 8th century BC, the Pythonesses were considered intermediaries between mortals and Apollo, uttering enigmatic prophecies under the influence of subterranean vapors. You approach a circular altar where a priest lights pine and resin incense. The thick, spicy scent mingles with the earthy tang of damp granite, an olfactory ASMR that contrasts with the chill in your bones. Light joke: if your air-conditioned office seems too dry, imagine a prophetic chamber filled with musty fumes and whispered chants. In front, the Pythoness, dressed in a plain robe, rocks on a makeshift stool while muttering unintelligible syllables. You feel every muscle tense, waiting for her to pronounce it, a phrase that may determine her immediate future. Marginal curiosity. Some sources claim that the priestess chewed laurel leaves to keep her voice steady and even distilled the resulting liquid in a chalice to offer to visitors as water inspired by the gods. When a fortune teller stops, the silence becomes palpable. The priest clears his throat and translates her words in a solemn tone. Beware the day when your feet touch the ground without offering. Your heart pounds in your chest as you try to decipher whether this means real danger or just poetic metaphor. Historians still debate whether the oracle's answers were created from intact religious formulas or whether they were strategically shaped by political authorities to influence state decisions. You tilt your head, noticing that the marble floor is worn smooth by the touch of thousands of pilgrims. Each crack bears the traces of coins and small bronze sheets left as offerings, a divine bargaining ritual that made victims believe they could by the gods' benevolence. Joke 2. If you keep coins in your purse for change today, imagine throwing them into a sacred while hoping for an answer about your love life. The priest offers you a handful of smooth stones and asks you to throw one onto the central fireplace. You hold them, cold, smooth, and almost ceramic in texture, and wonder what secrets they hold. As you throw them, you hear a tinkling sound that echoes through the room, as if the size of each stone were counting your doubts. Fun fact: in some consultations, if 3 stones fell onto burning coals, it was believed that the consultation would be especially favorable, and the person consulting should return with more expensive sacrifices. The atmosphere thickens as the priest calls for a sacrificial lamb. The animal is led down a side corridor, neighing in agony. You smell the metallic scent of blood mixed with incense, a shocking contrast that reinforces the ritual of death. Historians still question whether these sacrifices were carried out daily or only on festive dates, as reports vary greatly depending on the city-state. As the lamb is slaughtered, the warm blood splashes onto the altar and you catch a drop in a bronze bowl. The liquid shimmers in the flickering light, and the priest uses a staff to scratch symbols into it, deciphering blood patterns like hieroglyphics. Joke 3. If you binge-watch crime dramas today, imagine a live episode where DNA evidence is read in smoke and blood, without Netflix to pause. As the ritual comes to a close, the sound of drums echoes from the outer courtyard, beckoning you onward. A winding corridor leads to a smaller chamber, where a crack in a rock lets out a jet of aromatic vapor. You take a deep breath and feel your head grow light, almost floating on your own 2 feet. A side note, some records claim that the vapor contained hydrogen sulfide in low concentrations, causing a subtle euphoria. Others say it was simply smoke from hallucinogenic herbs. Historians still debate whether this effect was deliberately triggered by the priest to induce trance and maintain a mystery, or whether it was a natural phenomenon of the geological terrain of Delphi. You close your eyes and feel a tingling sensation in your brain, as if the fine line between reason and superstition has dissolved. As you leave the enclosure, the contrast with the daylight dazzles your senses. The fresh, dry air of the Parnassus cliff hits your face, bringing back memories of the entire ceremony. You realize that, even if you are a non-believer, you will forever carry the doubt about what you read between the lines of the prophecies. As you walk down the slope, each footstep echoes on the gravel path, and you realize that in ancient Greece, superstition was as powerful as the state itself. Academic debate. Scholars debate whether the Oracle at Delphi was a genuine religious center or a geopolitical powerhouse disguised as a sacred place. You walk back to town, the scent of pine trees mixed with the distant echo of pilgrims. Your breathing calms, and the tingling in your fingers gradually fades. You look at the abandoned temple and wonder, could you survive a whole day of paying tribute to the capricious gods? Maybe you could if you brought a healthy dose of skepticism. Or maybe you couldn't if your heart was caught by the sound of a prophetic tinkle. Either way, the prevailing superstitions of ancient Greece have gotten the better of you, and you'll never be the same. You return to your starting point, walking along the same worn stones of the agora where it all began, and feel the weight of the lessons you carry after a full day immersed in ancient Greece. Around you, the fiery market seems smaller now, as if it had been a training ground for modern life. Historical fact, many of the urban planning principles used in Athens, such as open squares for public debate, inspired the planning of democratic capitals centuries later, from Paris to Brasilia. You gaze at the empty stalls and imagine the intense heat of the spices on display, demanding your attention that day. Fun fact, historians have found record of traders using sunscreen made from fish fat and crocodile dung to protect themselves from the rays, a reminder that skincare is a concern that's been around for centuries, though you might not want to replicate that recipe today. As he walks, he reflects on the public baths and questionable hygiene that became a joke in Section 2. Today, we discuss basic sanitation as a universal right, but we still struggle to ensure clean water for billions. Academic debate. Contemporary experts still question whether the Greek model of hydraulic infrastructure, aqueducts and baths, could be restored in modern cities or is destined to remain only in historical engineering manuals. You touch the columns of the abandoned temple and feel the roughness of the stone, remembering the philosophical debates of Section 4. Plato spoke of the form of the good, but you realize that the pursuit of perfect ideals often paralyzed urgent decisions in Athens, an unsettling parallel to modern projects shelved by too much deliberation. Light joke, if the modern Senate took as long to decide as Plato did, we might still be choosing our domestic robot offspring. Looking at the pottery shards on the floor, you're reminded of Section 6's ostracism system, where citizens would write names on pieces of ostraca to ostracize dangerous leaders. You smile, thinking about how many tweets carried as much weight as those shards of clay, a reminder that public opinion has always been a double-edged sword. The breeze that blows through the courtyard carries echoes of the Dionysian chants of Section 11, and you can see how collective rituals still shape mass behavior today, from music festivals to protests on social media. Fun fact, there is evidence that crowning victors in Dionysian games generated an effect of psychological endosymbiosis, reinforcing community cohesion, a phenomenon studied today in sporting events and large-scale concerts. You pass by a makeshift goldsmith shop window, a reminder of Section 1. And compare the value we place on luxury today. The polished semi-precious stones still attract attention, but now they also come with a certificate of origin and a sustainability report. Academic debate. Economists discuss whether the luxury trade is a driver of development or a vector of inequality, an echo of tensions that already shook the ancient trade routes of the Aegean. As the sun sets, you think of the crushing sandals of Section 8 and the stiff togas of Section 12. Fashion can be a cultural expression, but can also be an instrument of exclusion. Today, we discuss the environmental impacts of fast fashion, something that, on a smaller scale, existed when Tyrian purple cost the equivalent of a skilled slave's wages. Joke 2. If you complain about your tight office shoes, try carrying a full toga and still smiling for your LinkedIn photo. You stand before the empty theater of Section 13, remembering the perfect acoustics and the pulsating drama. The art has continued to resonate for thousands of years, proving that compelling storytelling never loses its power. Fun fact: recent research suggests that live spectatorship neuroscience activates empathy brain regions more intensely than digital content. A reminder that even in a virtual age, physical presence is invaluable. At last you reach the towering oracle of Section 14, where prophetic vapors still seem to whisper doubts into your mind. Superstition, you acknowledge, has never left humanity completely. We invest in market prediction algorithms and big data dashboards in the hope of guaranteeing certainty, but we still ask the gods for answers when all else fails. Academic debate. Sociologists argue whether our reliance on modern forecasting technology is a new form of oracle, replacing temples with supercomputers. As you come full circle, reflect that to survive a day in ancient Greece, you needed courage, adaptability, and above all, a sense of humor. Perhaps it was laughter, whether it was when faced with an off keyboard or when remembering the trite broth in Section 3, that kept people going even in the most adverse circumstances. Now, as the sun sets, you understand that our modern cities carry ancient legacies in every column, in every law, and even in urban folklore. With every innovation, we repeat the human tragicomedy. We seek progress, but we face the same dilemmas of power, inequality, and a search for meaning. And, in the end, perhaps the greatest lesson is to recognize that history is not a static museum, but a mirror that challenges us to write a better future, without crocodile on the sunscreen, of course. Now you end your journey with a lighter mind and a heart warmed by all this ancient wisdom. Feel the pace slow down as you notice how the cool wind tears away the heat of the day, taking with it the dust of antiquity and leaving only a soft sigh in the air. Night falls gently, bringing the comfort of the familiar, your modern bed, your soft pillow, and the comforting sound of sheets sliding. Allow yourself to absorb every detail of the stories you have experienced, knowing that, even with your eyes closed, the echo of that agora remains in your breath. Breathe deeply, filling yourself with gratitude for the safety of a world that, despite being imperfect, has learned to build hospitals, invent padded shoes, and organize debates without flogging. As you settle in, remember that you can carry these lessons into tomorrow. Celebrate democracy with its imperfections, value the science that replaced the sacrifice of sheep, and fill your days with the lightness of laughter that spans millennia. Let the softness of ancient memories weave through the fabric of the present, making room for dreams as vast as the Aegean Sea and as bright as the torches of ancient theater. In the end, your heart rests in the knowledge that, however turbulent the journey, you have returned home with an unseen treasure. The understanding that we are heirs to challenges faced centuries ago, equipped today with tools that the fortune tellers could only imagine in hazy visions. And now, as you let out a soft sigh and let your eyes close, know that every story you have told will echo in your dreams like an ancient song, lulling your rest with the soft whisper of living history. In the script, sweet dreams.